Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Jeremy Leffler, and I work in the policy office at the National Science Foundation. And it's my pleasure to welcome you today to the Fall 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference. Before we begin, we'd like to take a poll to find out more about you. If you're using Zoom from a desktop browser, you may not be able to access the poll, so you want to make sure that you're viewing this and other presentations this week from within the Zoom application. We have once again arranged for the entire grants conference to take place online with a week's worth of webinars for the research community. They are running, this week from Monday through Thursday. And for information about the sessions and our speakers, you can visit the conference website. The content for this webinar series is similar to what it would be for an in-person conference. By the end of this conference, we want you to understand NSF, know what we fund, know how to prepare a good proposal. We want you to understand the merit review process at NSF, as well as your responsibilities for managing NSF awards. Sessions will range in scope from the broad overview of policies and processes to specific information about NSF Directorate programs. If you have questions for our presenters, please submit them using the Q&A function. Please do keep in mind that we have a lot of individuals attending this session, so we may not be able to answer all of your questions. We are recording this session, and it will be made available on our website, nsfpolicyoutreach.com, in the coming weeks, and we'll send an email announcement as soon as sessions are posted. If you have any technical difficulties during this presentation, please let us know in the Q&A and someone will assist you. Thank you for participating in our poll. We're happy and excited that you can join us. We've been doing these conferences for a long time. They started as small one-day events with a handful of program staff, and now we're doing multi-day virtual events with many NSF staff members, and we truly hope you enjoy this grants conference. I'm now pleased to present this session, which will cover proposal preparation at NSF. This session will be presented by Gene Feldman, Randy Phelps, and Jennifer Wade.
Well, welcome everyone to the Fall 2022 NSF Virtual Grants Conference and one of our most popular sessions, proposal preparation. Next slide, please. So we've got a panel today that's going to cover this particular topic. My name is Gene Feldman. I am head of the policy office in the Division of Institution and Award Support in the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management. I am delighted to present with two colleagues who I've worked with for a very long time, Randy Phelps, who is a staff associate in the Office of Integrative Activities in the Office of the Director, and Jennifer Wade, who is a program director in the Division of Earth Sciences in the Directorate for Geosciences. Next slide, please. Now, what are we going to cover in terms of this particular session? It's got a lot of meat to it in terms of the NSF process of preparing a proposal so that you're going to understand when you leave here, not only how to find a funding opportunity, but why the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide is important to this process and why you want to actually open it up and read the section on proposal preparation prior to starting the preparation of that proposal. We're going to talk about the types of proposal submissions to NSF, as well as the sections of an NSF proposal. And this is really important because we hope you leave with not only a sense of our expectations, but what reviewers will be looking for, reviewers and NSF program staff, when you actually go, NSF receives that proposal, and what do we do with it, and what do we look at those sections for? We also have sections that cover both the postdoctoral mentoring plan and the data management plan two particular sections of the proposal that are required for proposals submitted to NSF. Postdoctoral mentoring for all proposals that include postdocs on line B1 of the budget, and data management plans for all proposals. With that, I want to turn it over to my colleague Jen to begin the section on finding funding opportunities.
Thanks, Jean. So there are a few ways to find funding opportunities and other information on nsf.gov. First, you can just go straight to the funding tab along the top and get a lot of the information that we're presenting today. Policies, due dates, specific opportunities for students or postdocs, information about merit review, links to research.gov, and the grant proposal guide. Next. In addition, if you scroll down on the NSF main page, you'll find a quick little search box that lets you search for opportunities by a specific keyword or get some quick links to the policy guide, upcoming deadlines, and other information. Next. What I actually find most useful is the main award search page, where you can look up basically any award that's been made by any part of NSF. So if I type a keyword in here, it will bring up a list of awards, and I can find out who was funded, at what institution, for how much money, and by what program. And this is really helpful if you're trying to figure out what program your research fits into. Next. Lastly, there's grants.gov, which has a similar keyword search option to look for your own topic, and lots of resources to see which programs at NSF and even other agencies have funded work in that area. Next. So once you know what program you want to apply to, you need to get a proposal together. And the first document to be familiar with is the PAPG, or the Proposal and Award Policies and Procedures Guide. So this document's incredibly useful and tells you almost everything you need to know about submitting to NSF. And it's important to keep in mind that it's updated every year, so make sure you're working from the most recent version. It's split into two parts, so let's talk about what's inside. Next. So the PAPG contains guidance for preparing and submitting proposals, tells you how those proposals will be reviewed, and it also explains why a proposal might be returned without review. Tells you how to withdraw a proposal if you need to do that, and then it includes all of the policies that you and your institution need to know if you get an award. Next slide. So the proposal guide also lays out the different kinds of funding opportunities that exist. So each one is a little different, and you want to make sure that you know which kind of opportunity you're submitting to before you start preparing a proposal. So program descriptions and program announcements, these follow all the instructions within the PAPG. Program solicitations sort of add an extra layer of guidelines on top of the PAPG. So you follow the PAPG, but the solicitation might have extra requirements on top of that you want to make sure that you're aware of. And then dear colleague letters are sort of notifications of opportunities that are really special competitions, often for supplements to existing awards, but could be a bunch of different things. Next slide. So in any funding opportunity, no matter what the type, you want to make sure you understand a few key components. First, the goal of the program, right? Does your proposed research and your institution, you as a PI, do you fit within that goal? The second is eligibility. So there are a lot of reasons that as a PI or something about your institution where you work might be eligible or ineligible to apply for certain opportunities. So you want to make sure you understand if you can even submit before you do all that work. And the third thing you want to make sure of is that you're meeting any special proposal preparation or award requirements that are specific to that program announcement, those announcements we just talked about. And the way to find that out is to just read the details of whatever opportunity you're submitting to. Next. So I think the majority of funding opportunities at NSF involve a solicitation. So let's use this as an example to figure out whether an opportunity is right for you. So here's a screenshot of the NSF Includes solicitation. And you can see there's a solicitation number up here. That's helpful to ensure that you're applying to the right place and to the most recent version of a solicitation, since they do sometimes change. The solicitation will tell you which directorates or offices are participating, and here it will describe any recent revisions, right? So you might be really familiar with a program, but you need to keep in mind that we revise them fairly often. So even if it's a program you've submitted before, make sure you check that section. Next. So also on the cover page of a solicitation, it will tell you how many awards the program expects to make and how much money that program has to spend. So this can kind of give you a sense of what size budget you can ask this program to support for your own proposal. Next. And the next thing you'll find on a solicitation page is that critical eligibility information, right? What kinds of institutions can submit? Who can be PI? Is there a limit on how many proposals per organization or per PI that can be submitted to the program? Next slide. So the solicitation will also tell you whether there's a deadline that you need to submit to. Some programs like mine actually have no deadlines. So a proposal can be submitted anytime that it's ready. Next. Some programs have target dates, which means there's sort of a semi-rigid deadline. So the program wants proposals to come in by a certain date, but it might be flexible for a few reasons. And it's always critical to contact the program directors if you might miss the target date and need that flexibility. Next slide. The most firm type, of course, is a deadline date. And that means proposals will not be accepted at all beyond 5 p.m. submitter's local time. So deadlines can't move unless something truly exceptional happens to a broad set of people. So these are the submission types that we always remind people to start working towards very early, just in case. Next. And there's also a submission window, which sort of acts like a deadline, but it also has a starting date for submissions as well. But when you see submission window, know that it has a deadline, a true deadline at the end of it. Next. So 2 last submission types we want you to be aware of actually come before a full proposal gets submitted, and those are letters of intent and preliminary proposals. Letters of intent are short letters that PIs submit stating they intend to submit a full proposal to a program. So if one's required, it'll say so in the solicitation or other opportunity document. It's not a binding document, it's just something that some programs use, especially programs that are either really big or maybe they're new, so it's unclear how many proposals will come in. We use these to sort of plan ahead what we'll need in the program in terms of reviewers or panelists or program directors. Next. Preliminary proposals are a little bit longer than a letter of intent and can serve another purpose, right? They do help the program plan ahead in terms of reviewers and staffing, but it also could be used as a sort of preliminary round of review. It might be that you submit a preliminary proposal and then are not invited to submit a full proposal because the program doesn't think the project is the right fit. And this saves you as a PI from writing a whole giant full proposal. So again, it's really important to read the solicitation or the Dear Colleague letter or whatever opportunity you're responding to make sure you understand what's required, not just when you submit that full proposal, but before you submit that full proposal. And as always, reach out to the program with questions beforehand if you have them. It's a lot easier to fix things before something's been submitted to NSF than after. And that's what we as program directors are here for.
Thank you, Jennifer. So you've decided now to submit a proposal. So let's talk a little bit about what the sections of the proposal are and what you need to consider when you're writing a proposal. The first thing I want to talk about is what we call a single copy document. This is a section of the proposal that is for NSF eyes only, if you will. It contains information that the reviewers will not see. So you need to keep that in mind and do not confuse a single copy document section with, for example, a supplemental document, which the reviewers do see. So sometimes that does happen, and it is inconvenient at best to have information that only NSF sees and the reviewers will not. And you can see why in this set of bullets, why it is that you do not want reviewers to see some of this information. The list is here. I won't go through it verbatim, but one thing I do want to point out is there is a possibility for providing a list of suggested reviewers to either include or not to include. So NSF can take that advice to when trying to consider what reviewers might be appropriate for the review of your proposal. And that's clearly not something that you want the reviewers themselves to see, especially if you say that you don't want reviewer XYZ to actually review your proposal. Proprietary or privileged information, if it's allowable in the solicitation, is also something you don't want the world to see other than the eyes that need to see it, that because you've decided that it is proprietary or privileged. There are other certifications that may be required, and also information about collaborators and other affiliations. NSF uses that list to identify potential conflicts of interest for the review of the proposal. As you will hear quite a bit during this grant session, you'll find that NSF it takes conflicts of interest very, very seriously. So this is something that we use, and it is a required part of the single copy documents. Next slide, please. So sections of the proposal that reviewers do see are listed here, and there are quite a few sections here that you need to be aware of. None probably more important than the project description, but other sections are also incredibly important as well, and we'll cover some of these, cover all of these in the next number of slides. So the cover sheet, project summary, project description, references cited, biographical sketches, the budget justification, current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources, a data management plan, and a postdoc mentoring plan if that's appropriate for your proposal. So these are all the sections that are required in a proposal, and we'll cover them in the next number of slides. Next slide, please. So the cover sheet, and it's important to note that many of the boxes on the cover sheet are electronically pre-filled when you start your proposal and when you write your proposal. I won't go through all of these little sections, obviously, but at the very top is the funding opportunity to which you're submitting. For example, NSF 22-1 is the grant proposal guide, the PAPG as it was referred to earlier. And that is unsolicited proposal just submitted to the requirements of the PAPG. The program that you want to have consider your proposal is in the next box, and there are a number of other identifiers for your institution. Also, the amount that you're requesting, how long you want your proposal to be, for example, 36 months. These 3 years here. Hopefully you will not be requesting $0. So we can't make awards for $0. And also certifications here, whether you have human subjects in your proposal, vertebrate animals, whether or not there are any environmental issues that might be considered, and so on and so forth. These boxes change occasionally, and there are some boxes that will be in effect with the new PAP guide, but do make sure that you check whatever is appropriate in these boxes as well. So next slide, please. The project summary, I mentioned that the project description is the most important part, but the project summary is probably equally important as well, because it's the first thing that not only the reviewers, but the NSF program director or program officer, those phrases are used interchangeably, will see when your proposal comes in, and they are used to get a sense of what your proposal is about. For example, what panel might be most appropriate for reviewing your proposal. This section has changed quite a bit over the years since I've been at NSF, which is now 15 years. We used to have to parse out all of these sections in a ad lib format that PIs would use, and to their great credit, our staff at NSF have made this a much more tractable problem for program directors to address and utilize, and it's much more useful than it perhaps used to be in earlier days. So the reason I say that is that this section must contain an overview and individual statements about the intellectual merit and the broader impacts of the project that you're submitting to NSF. We used to have to look at various paragraphs, as I said, to try and identify what the intellectual merit was, what you had said the intellectual merit was, and what the broader impacts are. These are two review criteria determined by the National Science Board, our governing body, to ensure that proposals to NSF meet both the science criteria as well as a societal impact or science impact. So we need to make sure that we have that information. And now proposals that do not separately address the overview and both merit review criteria will not be accepted by research.gov or grants.gov. Note that FastLane has gone away for all intents and purposes. So now we'll be talking a lot more about research.gov instead of FastLane. Next slide, please. The project description is the meat of your proposal. It's where you talk about what you are planning to do. The project description as listed here is where you address what you want to do, what you plan to do, how you're going to go about doing it, and how you'll judge whether or not the project is successful. And typically from the PAPG, you have 15 pages to address all of these criteria in your project description. That may seem like a lot, but by the time you start writing your proposal, you find that it's very difficult to say what you want to say in that amount of space. Some solicitations will give you some extra space, but if it doesn't explicitly say so, then the limit is likely to be 15 pages. And asking a program director or program officer if you can have more space is not going to be accepted. The reason we do that, and this is something that I do want to point out, is I gave up a faculty position to work at NSF. People sometimes wonder why I went into a bureaucracy, even though universities tend to be a bureaucracy as well. But we are not here to be bureaucrats and draw the letter of the law, if you will, on these requirements. It's for fairness. We get many, NSF gets over 40,000 proposals, I think, every year, and you'll hear more about that. But it's important to be fair to everyone who submits to not only a program, but also to NSF in general. So our requirements, that those that are listed in the PAPG and those in a solicitation, are there to make sure that everyone is on a level playing field when they submit a proposal. So please pay attention to those requirements in a solicitation and the PAP guide, and follow the rules. That's one of the best ways to make sure that your proposal is reviewed and reviewed hopefully well. One thing that I do want to point out is you have 15 pages, but that's not a place for you to just ramble in terms of determining what your proposal is about. Remember that you are writing a proposal, but reviewers are going to be looking at not just your proposal that has 15 pages of rather important scientific information, but they're also going to be looking at probably 10, maybe 20 other proposals that are trying to get the same amount of money or similar amount of money. And you need to tell a story, a compelling story. So just telling a story about what you plan to do is not sufficient. You need to make sure that reviewers are excited about what you're discussing. And here again, you need to have a separate section within the narrative that includes a discussion of the broader impacts of the proposed activities. Next slide. References cited, and that seems pretty apparent in an academic environment. You need to cite the references that you are using for your research in your narrative, your project description. And one thing that I will just say here, a lot of proposals that I have seen describe what the PI and the co-PIs have done in the references cited. It's important to put your project in the greater perspective of what's happening both nationally and internationally to make sure that the reviewers understand what your contribution is going to be, not just how you are going to extend what you've done in the past, for example, but how it fits into the broader scientific enterprise. So make sure that your references, and in a format that is accepted by your scholarly practices, make sure that you put your project into the context and reference others, even though they may be competitors. Make sure that reviewers know what it is that you are doing that is going to make NSF's investment worthwhile to advance the fields of science and engineering. Next slide, please. And biographical sketches. Biographical sketches are required for all senior project personnel, and that's defined in the PAP guide. So the PI, the co-PI, and anyone you define as senior personnel need to have a biographical sketch. And there is a standard format for this, and an NSF approved format. And please pay attention to the new PAP guide, because there's going to be information about the evolution of the required format for the biographical sketches. But here, the biographical sketches are used to assess how well qualified the individual team or organization is to conduct the proposed activities. It is an important part, and remember that all the reviewers are not necessarily going to know who you are. So this is a chance for you to toot your own horn, if you will, with the required sections that are in the biographical sketch. Remember, this too is not a random format. It has requirements for you to report, and please pay attention to that. So now I will turn the presentation over to my colleague, Jean Feldman, to talk about other sections of the proposal.
Well, thanks, Randy. Now I'm going to go into a piece of the budget that a lot of folks need particular help with, and that's the budget and the budget justification. So each proposal must contain a budget for each year of support that's requested. And the budget justification that you provide is also required, and it must be no more than 5 pages for all of the years of the project combined. The proposals that have subawards also have to have a budget justification, and those also can be no more than 5 pages for each subaward. So let's talk about the overall concept of the budget and the budget justification, because again, this is an area that daily we get questions on at policy@nsf.gov. And so really the purpose and what we're trying to achieve in this, looking at this particular section of the proposal, is, do you have sufficient resources necessary to carry out the project as proposed? And so obviously we're giving the proposal to peer reviewers in your field. That will be covered in terms of the actual process for that in the merit review section. But these are our colleagues who are familiar with the type of research that you're doing. And they're looking at this proposal and saying, hey, if I were doing this research, this is the way, not in terms of specific dollar values, but these are the kinds of categories that I might consider putting on a proposal submission to NSF. And as you note on the right side of the screen, we have what the budget summary proposal budget printout looks like in the proposal, as well as the various categories in which proposals, funds can be requested from the National Science Foundation. Now, one more comment I'd like to make about this is that if you have any category that you have included a dollar value in, it behooves you to ensure that in the budget justification, you cover each and every one of those categories, because that is your best way to explain to NSF and the reviewers who may not understand why you've requested funding in that particular category, what it is you're using those funds to do in terms of this particular project. Next slide, please. Now, information regarding the budget guidelines can be found in the PAP guide. Obviously, they're for every one of those sections that were on that budget. We also have a section in the PAP guide that describes those, what you can ask for and what it's for in terms of an allowable cost. So we also want to emphasize, though, that some program solicitations have a budgetary section that they do some more amplification in as to what specific limitations may be as it relates to that particular solicitation. So reading that section of the solicitation is vitally, vitally important. So folks always ask us, well, how much do I ask for? Well, the bottom line quotation that you should always remember to yourself is ask for what you need. What do you need to conduct that research? And give us the amount of money necessary to do that particular category of funding. So clearly the amounts have to be realistic. Again, that is something that will be focused on as part of the NSF review process. The reasonableness aspect, again, as I've already mentioned, is something that program staff and reviewers will be focusing on in terms of, is it reasonable to do what you want to do by asking for that category of information? And then again, it has to be consistent with program guidelines. Now, on that form that we briefly showed you, there are 5 major categories that should be covered. Personnel, Part A, which is senior personnel, and all the other senior personnel, which are put in Part B of the budget. Then you're going to put any equipment that you may need to conduct the research that is not available at your organization. Any travel that you plan to conduct, both foreign or domestic travel, and a justification of what you intend to do, where you're traveling somewhere. Give us a sense of why that travel is necessary. Participant support costs, which is associated with training activities at NSF, conference or training activities. Many people assume it means anybody on the budget is a participant. It's not. It's those associated with conference or training activities. And it will have things such as stipends, subsistence, travel, other, where you can explain for those types of proposal what you're going to use, how many participants you're going to have, and the costs associated with each of those, with, again, a justification for each. And then finally, a category for other direct costs, subawards, consultant arrangement, computer services, and the associated, in accordance with what I've been saying all along, the actual justification in the budget justification on why you need that particular amount of funding in that category. But remember, let's focus on the basic that I started with. Ask for what you need. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn over to a different section of the proposal that is kind of used in conjunction with facilities, equipment, and other resources. So you may fall into a situation where you are providing resources, your institution, for a particular part of to conduct that particular activity. So the facilities, equipment, and other resources plus the budget tell us whether you have the necessary resources to carry out the proposed effort. And so there is no page limit to this section of the proposal, but it's really not supposed to be quantifiable financial information, but a textual description of the types of things that your institution, specialized really, we're not talking about do you have a computer at your desk, but things that your institution will be providing or your organization will be providing to help conduct that research. Next slide, please. And then finally, the last section of the proposal that I will be talking about is current and pending support. So current and pending support is also required. And this section of the proposal asks for information on all current and pending support for ongoing projects and proposals, the purpose as well as any in-kind contributions that are required to be disclosed as part of the chart I'm going to talk about next. So it's about projects and proposals that you are receiving current and pending support from, as well as any in-kind contributions that you are receiving to help carry out that particular research project. So what do we use this information for? This information is used differently than other sections of the proposal. If you look at the Chapter 3 of the PAP Guide, where we talk about intellectual merit and broader impacts, it will tell you each question that reviewers are asked to assess. Well, we want to make sure that you have the sufficient information to address those questions. Well, current and pending support is one of the only ones that's really not identified on that list because it has a different purpose. We're asking for it to assess the capacity of the individual to carry out the research as proposed, as well as to help assess any potential overlap or duplication with the project being proposed. Next slide, please. Now, I wanted to emphasize this particular table to you because it is a table that continues to be updated over time and is very vital in terms of your understanding of NSF expectations. So down on the vertical category, we have a whole series of activities. This is multiple pages long in length. And the reason that it's long is that it's based on the questions that people have asked us really about completion of current and pending support. But we want to make sure you have a full understanding of all of the disclosures that you have to submit. So we start with something like undergrad, graduate, and postdoctoral training. That's not going to be in current and pending support, but rather in the biographical sketch. And the same with all of your academic, professional, or institutional appointments or positions, whether or not remuneration is received and whether full-time, part-time, or voluntary, also in the biographical sketch. But then we have a whole series of other ones of these that really help you understand where it should be submitted in the proposal: biographical sketch, current and pending support, facilities, equipment, and other resources, which I just mentioned. And let me go over one that gives you an example of what you might put in that section I just talked about: facilities, equipment, and other resources. So any in-kind contributions that support the research activity for use on the project or proposal being proposed are included in the facilities, equipment, and other resources. Why? So that NSF and its reviewers can assess whether or not you have the capacity, have all the necessary resources to carry out that project as proposed. There is also 3 other columns that are I would also like to note: project reports, the post-award information term and condition, and then disclosure not required. The reason that we have spent so much time emphasizing the disclosure not required on this particular table is to help you understand that NSF, and frankly, our colleagues at NIH, as they have been working on their table as well, till we all move to the government-wide table, really spent time trying to help eliminate administrative burden and to help us make sure that if we're not going to use a particular piece of information, that we don't ask for it. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to turn it back to Randy, who's going to cover special information and supplementary documentation. Thanks, Randy.
Thank you, Jean. The next part of the proposal that I will talk about will be the section called the Special Information and Supplementary Documentation. It contains several sections itself, subsections, if you will. One being the data management plan, one being the statement of collaboration. Here it's referred to as the letters of collaboration, and I'll elaborate on that in just a moment or so. And a postdoc mentoring plan if it's appropriate for your project. Next slide, please. So let's talk about the statements of collaboration. And I say that because what is referred to here as the letters of collaboration and what you normally are familiar with or think about when you have a collaborator provide some documentation saying that they are going to collaborate with you is not a letter endorsing the project. If we wanted a person to be a reviewer, we would ask them to be a reviewer. And if they're a collaborator of yours, then they're conflicted for being a reviewer. So all we want is a statement, a single statement that says, if the proposal submitted by Dr. and the name of the PI entitled in the proposal title is selected for funding by NSF, it is my intent to collaborate and or commit resources as detailed in the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. That is important because the proposal is supposed to be self-contained. That is, the reviewers will be looking at these sections that are in the proposal, the project description and the facilities, equipment, and other resources to find out what the project team is going to do and what resources they're going to have or need in order to do the project. It must not, this letter, this statement, must not recommend or endorse the PI or project. I say in almost every instance when I do this section that if I have a legacy at NSF, I want it to be this because to my knowledge, I started this in the Major Research Instrumentation program many years ago, this statement of collaboration, and it's found its way throughout the foundation in various forms. So at least I have a legacy, what minor or major, however you define it. So as is mentioned in the next sentence here, that all relevant collaborative activity should be described in the proposal itself, and by the proposal I mean the project description or the facilities, equipment, and other resources. And there's a list of possibilities here of what might be required in that collaborative effort. Intellectual contributions, permission to access a site, use instrumentation or a facility, for example, offer to furnish samples or materials, logistical support, evaluation services, or mentoring of U.S. students at foreign sites. There are many other possibilities, so don't take this as a comprehensive list. There are maybe other options for you to have in your collaborative activities. So next slide, please. Another option in this section on supplemental documents and other information is the mentoring for postdoctoral researchers. If your project contains postdocs and they're on the budget line, then our systems will look to see whether a postdoc is being requested, and it will require that there be a postdoctoral mentoring plan. So as the first bullet says, proposals that include funding to support postdoctoral researchers must include a description of the mentoring activities. And these mentoring activities will be evaluated by the reviewers and the program directors. By the way, one thing that you will hear is that reviewers provide advice to NSF. So the reviewers, the reviewer panels, they provide advice to the program directors, who then make a recommendation to the division director at NSF, who then concurs on the award, and then it goes to our division of grants and agreements. So it's a long process that we use use for our merit review, which is considered to be the gold standard across the government and across the world, actually, for reviewing proposals. So these mentoring plans will be reviewed under the broader impacts criteria by all of those who will be looking at the proposal and making recommendations for funding. As is listed here, and I mentioned proposals that do not include a mentoring plan, if a proposal requests a postdoc on the budget line, will be prevented from submission. And that is a big improvement over past times when we would have to make sure that we saw that there was a mentoring plan if there was a request on the budget line. Now it's done automatically, so be aware of that. And this comes back to the issue of, if there's a deadline, you want to make sure that you submit well before that deadline, because then you have a chance to make a correction. For example, that if you forgot to put a mentoring plan in and your proposal wasn't accepted by the system, you have a chance to add it if you've done your submission attempt many days, if not a week or two or more, before the actual deadline. One thing I'll digress a little bit here, but if there is a deadline, one analysis that we did on one of the programs that I do, the Major Research Instrumentation Program, 80% of the proposals were submitted on the day of the deadline, and 50% of the proposals, of all the proposals, were submitted within 2 hours of the 5 p.m. local time deadline. If you do that and you make a mistake, there's no way to correct it in time, usually. And then you have submitted, you've taken all that time to write a proposal that NSF cannot accept, perhaps, or might return without review because a section is missing. Please submit early when you are submitting a proposal. And the last bullet here, I'll come back to this particular slide. For collaborative proposals, the lead organization must submit a mentoring plan for the entire project. You will learn more about what it means to have a collaborative proposal. That's when two organizations here, for example, submit individual proposals that are linked in the system, and one institution is considered to be the lead. Another possibility is for one institution to submit a proposal with subawards to the institution, but you'll hear more about that during this grants conference. Next slide, please. And continuing with the mentoring plan, here's a list of possibilities for the mentoring plan. I'm not going to read the bullets, as I sometimes say. I'm not going to and then do, in part because having a list is something that most people tend to think, I need to check the boxes for each one of those particular items. There are possibilities for a mentoring plan. These are some of them. You will have these slides and take them to heart, but realize that when we provide examples, they are just examples. It's not a comprehensive list. So next slide, please. And the data management plan. This is important, and it's been around for a number of years now. It's been around for a long time in some form, but it's been explicitly stated more recently in the last 5+ years. All proposals are required to include as a supplementary document a data management plan of up to 2 pages. Again, there's a page limit here. Please don't try and exceed that. But please take advantage of the 2 pages to be comprehensive in explaining your data management plan to the reviewers and the program directors. The plan should describe how the proposal will conform to NSF policy on dissemination and sharing of research results. It's important to know what those dissemination and sharing of research result policies are. So again, the PAP guide is your good book to read before you go to bed at night. It is a long, comprehensive document, so don't think that you can just glance through it in one sitting. But this is one thing that you need to be aware of that is in the PAP guide. Note that it may be possible for a valid data management plan to include only a statement that says no detailed plan is needed. My personal advice is that doesn't go over well with the researchers in most cases. There may be exceptions that I have not seen, but a valid data management plan saying that no plan is needed is valid, and that statement needs to be there because our systems will look for it when a proposal is submitted. Don't just leave that section blank. But you do need to have a clear justification for why that would be true. Reviewers will be looking at that information, and you need to convince the reviewers that no detailed plan is needed if in fact you're going to state that in the data management plan. And here again, note that the review criteria for NSF are the intellectual merit and the broader impacts, as well as any other solicitation specific criteria. But here the data management plan will be reviewed as part of the intellectual merit and or the broader impacts as appropriate in the proposal. So next slide, please. Oftentimes we get a question about, I'm a geologist, what are the requirements for a data management plan? I happen to be an astronomer, so we have our own practices for what is considered to be a data management plan. So for example, making data available after a year or some time frame. Your individual discipline may be different. Social, behavioral, economic sciences, if you happen to be an archaeologist, you have to have all of your artifacts, your fossils available to the public. There is a site here, and it's listed at the top. So, and it's also listed in the PAP guide to identify what the requirements are within certain disciplines if they've specified what the expectations are for a data management plan. So be aware that there is guidance for data management plans in individual disciplines. So take advantage of that when you are writing your data management plan. Don't just assume there is a possibility for obtaining guidance on what is the expectation for a data management plan. Next slide, please. So the mantra that you will hear throughout this grants conference is ask early and ask often. So there are a number of resources that are available for you. One of my pieces of advice is don't just decide you're going to submit a proposal without identifying some of the resources that you're going to hear about or have heard about already. One of the big things is to know the NSF website, know the NSF PAP guide, read the solicitation, and make sure that both the PAP guide and the solicitation are the most recent versions of that. It's important to note that revisions take time, and sometimes they don't come out at the time that you might expect them to come out, but you will always have at least 90 days from the time that a solicitation is posted until The deadline, if there is a deadline, applies simply because we need to give you time to soak in what changes have occurred, both in terms of the PAP guide and, in this case, the solicitations. There are other resources, if you can, and you will hear this often too, serve as a panelist if you're not submitting a proposal in a particular round. There's no better way to understand how a proposal is reviewed than to serve as a panelist. So you will hear that often, I will say. So with that, I will end this presentation and leave time for some questions and answers that you have submitted in Zoom or in your system, and we'll address those questions as we get to them. So thank you very much for attending the grants conference.
Okay, thank you, panelists, and I'd like to welcome all of you back to answer questions. We've been answering a lot of questions as we've been presenting in the Q&A. So we've attempted to answer a number of them, but we do have a lot of questions, and I don't know that we're going to get to all of them. But what I've tried to do is break them out in subjects kind of according to the way the presentation was structured. What I would also say is that if we don't get to your question, I did put in a chat a link to the frequently asked questions document for the PAP guide that is on the NSF website. And a lot of the questions that you are asking are actually answered in that document. So what I'd like to be able to do is pose some questions that I think will have some, be a greater good to the entire group here that is listening, almost 2,500 of you. So let me begin, and also Jean, Jennifer, and Randy, if there's anything you think I've left out once we go through these, please by all means jump in with some of the questions that you may have seen that I may have skipped over. But the first one, a couple of questions are about the types of funding opportunities that we spoke about earlier in the presentation. And a question was asked, can you speak to a little bit more about how Dear Colleague letters are used at NSF and how they may be unique to the way we do things at NSF?
Well, I'll take a shot at that, and then I'll have my other colleagues join in. So NSF uses Dear Colleague letters in a couple of different ways, primarily. The first is to announce just general information, maybe about the program. You want to talk about the program and let people know a little bit more about it in terms of changes you're making to that program. We also, upcoming opportunities, you're preparing the entire community for, and just saying, just be thinking about this type of activity and whether you might want to consider submitting a proposal once that funding opportunity is announced. But predominantly, they are used to announce NSF's interest in receiving certain types of proposals. And we call those out in the PAP guide, particularly rapid. And those are rapid response research, where we want to have folks submit proposals, natural or anthropogenic events. You've got a hurricane and you want to get some data real quickly. So we announce a DCL saying, please submit your proposals to NSF in response to that particular natural or anthropogenic event. We did it for COVID as well. We do the same for our early concept grants for exploratory research, as well as our RAISE, which stands for Research Advanced by Interdisciplinary Science and Engineering. We may say we're interested in receiving RAISE proposals for this particular topical area, as well as conferences. So they are not intended to replace solicitations. In other words, they're not really intended, except for that group of proposals I mentioned, to generate full proposals in response to a DCL. So again, there's a couple of primarily different reasons that we use them for, but you will, when you see a Dear Colleague letter referenced on our website, see specifically what we're asking, and you'll get a great sense of what NSF's intent is in issuance of that DCL. PCL. Jennifer or Randy, anything else to add to that?
I think that was a great summary. The most recent one that I've been involved in was announcing a new collaboration between astronomy and earth sciences. So it can also be sort of announcing interesting programs like that.
There you go.
Yeah, there's nobody better to answer these questions than Jean, so I will not add anything.
Okay. Thanks.
So the next question was about trying to identify areas that allow for conference proposals. But so I'll ask that question, but perhaps also to ask the question more generally, how do you find the things that you're looking for in terms of finding programs at NSF? What's the best way to go ahead and do that?
I'll take a stab at this one first. So conference proposals first. A lot of programs will welcome conference proposals. If you're in a community and you think, wow, it would be really useful to get some people together to solve X problem or come up with a grand challenge, whatever, contact the program director in your program and say, are you open to a conference proposal? They usually don't have they can come in anytime in many programs. So reach out to the PO. As Randy said, we will say that many times this week. Reach out to the PO and say, hey, I'm interested in this. Would you be willing to support it? Generally, how to find information about where your research might fit or opportunities. My favorite thing is to go to the nsf.gov website. There's a search bar at the top. Or awards, go to search awards. You can type in any keyword of what you work on and it will pull up a list of every award that NSF has made in that area. So if you study watersheds, you can just type watersheds and it'll bring a list. You can click on it, read the abstract of the work, find out how much money they got and what program funded it.
Yeah, I'll just add, Jennifer's spot on in terms of contacting a program officer to find out whether a conference proposal is warranted, but there are some solicitations that have conference proposals as part of it. One that comes to mind was the last Strengthening American Infrastructure from the Social, Behavioral, and Economic Sciences Directorate. So take a look at some solicitations to see whether conference proposals themselves are solicited.
And let me just add one more thing. We do have in the other types of proposals section of the PAP guide, instructions for preparation of a conference proposal, and they are standardized across the foundation. So if you are submitting, you have one place you go to, and it's the PAP guide, and they will tell you exactly what must be included in a conference proposal and how that conference proposal should be prepared and formatted.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about personnel. So first off, we got a question asking us if we can review the new investigator designation. I think, Jean, you wanted to take a stab at that question.
Yeah, that's a point of confusion because it's on the cover sheet. There's a little checkbox and folks are not reading the reference that say, go to this particular section, which is in our special processing section of the PAP guide. And it really only relates to one directorate, and that's the Biological Sciences Directorate. So you're not checking it for every directorate. And the reason that it only applies to the Biological Sciences Directorate is they have very specific limitations on when you can submit for simultaneous consideration a proposal to the Biological Sciences Directorate and another funding organization outside of NSF. Often people ask about NIH. And so in order to ensure that it's considered by one agency at a time, they have a set of parameters. And one of the abilities for you is if you are a new investigator defined in that section, you can submit for simultaneous consideration a proposal submitted both to the Biological Sciences Directorate and another funding organization. So that's a particular limitation that applies to biological sciences and does not apply to the other directorates. You can submit to both NSF and another funding the same proposal for consideration at the same time.
Okay, let's talk more generally about who can be on that cover sheet. So the question is, can a doctoral student or a postdoc be a co-PI, or can they be senior personnel on a proposal?
Well, I'm going to start, and then I'm going to let my research directorate colleagues answer. The simple answer is it's up to the institution to make a determination as to who goes on that cover sheet, because whoever goes on that cover sheet will actually be named in the award notice as a PI or co-PI. So we don't make those determinations. Actually, the organization does that's submitting the proposal. Another important point is that we do have some types of proposals. Postdoc fellowships comes to mind where they have to be listed on the cover sheet. So they will be giving you specific instructions in the solicitation for those specific types of proposals. But generally, it is up to the organization to determine who's on that cover sheet. Now I'll let my colleagues add to that.
That's the easy answer.
Yeah,
I don't know. Randy, what do you think?
As I said, Jean is our expert in answering some of these questions. But I will just add that one has to be a little bit careful too, even if someone is a junior faculty member on a proposal, for example, in the major research instrumentation program, there are questions that might be raised by reviewers about the seniority of the person and whether it's appropriate for someone to be on the cover sheet as a PI or a co-PI. Even if it's allowable, just make sure that there's justification in the proposal for the team that is being proposed, that they are the right team for the particular project.
Yes.
Agreed.
Great response, Randy.
Okay, sticking with personnel, perhaps you can discuss a little bit of the distinction between somebody who's seen as a collaborator and a consultant.
Go ahead, Jen and Randy.
Sure. So Randy probably has more experience with this in the instrumentation world, but in my experience, a collaborator is really someone who is intellectually engaged in the project and is working alongside you to do some work. And a consultant is someone that you're often paying a fee to do a task on a project. And that's really the fundamental difference between the two. That's the difference.
And in the bottom line is, that is exactly what a consultant does. They are providing professional services. They are defined into CFR 200 as professional services. That's where they list consultants, because that's where that is exactly what they're doing. As Jen meant, they're performing a specific test, or they're performing something that is directly used, but not the intellectual, same as, the individuals that are serving as PIs and co-PIs. They're collaborating with another individual to help carry out that particular part of it, but not like a consultant that's performing, a specific task.
Okay, let's move on to some of the required proposal sections that you discussed. And let's begin with the project description. And the question is really, do you have tips for how the project description should be formatted? For example, should you start with the goal of the project and then cover intellectual merit and then broader impacts? Or do you have any suggestions for how that should be done?
I think this will vary by... Oh, go ahead, Randy.
I was just sorry about that. I was just going to say that some solicitations specify what the format of the project description should be, and I'll just leave it at that and refer back to you, Jen.
Yeah, that's totally true. Some will lay out specifically. I think every discipline probably has a little bit of a different take on this. My advice to PIs is always start with a compelling reason for why they want to do this work, and a really successful proposal tells a story of and makes the justification for the project. And that can just be done in so many different ways. It really depends on what you're proposing to do. I can't really say what, you need to have the broader impacts section. Some proposals have it interwoven throughout the whole project. I can say that in many programs, I'll speak for my own. If all you have is like a 1-paragraph section of broader impacts at the end of your proposal, that's not really as strong as a well thought out section on those broader impacts. So those are sort of general thoughts, but it really varies program to program.
I will let my colleagues chime in on this aspect. If you're resubmitting a proposal, you submitted a proposal, it got reviewed, but it didn't get funded, and you made the changes in the revised project description and the revised proposal, and you submit it. There's always a question about whether you should address at the beginning whether or not you should address what the changes were in this revised proposal, or just make the changes that were recommended by the reviewers in the previous round. Anecdotally, I will say that reviewers can be annoyed if they see at the beginning of a proposal what the changes were in a previous proposal, because they are reviewing the proposal. They're not supposed to take into consideration. They don't like taking into consideration what the previous reviewers said. They're reviewing this proposal because they've been asked to do so. So
yeah,
my take, my advice, my personal advice is don't address specifically at the beginning of a proposal what changes were made in a revision. Just make sure that your proposal is a better proposal than the one that was submitted before.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that. This is like my 52nd grants conference, and this is typically asked every single time. It is a de novo review. They are starting from scratch and highlighting places where reviewers had concerns about X. Beyond what Randy was talking about, points out areas where people had problems with your proposals before. Just use that guidance that you got from prior reviews to help improve the quality and substantially revise this proposal to address those concerns.
Fully agree.
Okay, let's move on to the budget. So NSF policy generally states that a PI's salary is limited to 2 months across all NSF awards. And the question is, under what conditions is it appropriate for the PI to request more than 2 months of effort? As we do say that you can request more and it has to be approved. So under what conditions would that be something that a program officer would approve?
Well, it's not a one size fits all. So let's just remember that there isn't one standard answer that would say, oh, okay, that means you can do more than 2 months. Typically, it's absolutely related to the project that you're proposing to do, that you need, because of the continued monitoring that you need to do of the plants growing in that lab, you need to spend more than 2 months. It absolutely should be related to what it is that you want to do. And then I'm going to let my colleagues who see this all the time talk a little bit more.
Yeah, and I would say in the Geosciences, we see it the most when someone's at a soft money institution. And so they don't have the 9-month salary the way a faculty member, a regular faculty member does. And so, again, this is a time where it's good to talk to the program director about what they consider reasonable within that program. But we see it a lot in earth and ocean sciences, especially for people on soft money and for postdocs who are serving as PIs. On a proposal.
Right.
Yeah, I was just going to add the same comment. In astronomy, it's well known that a number of researchers are on soft money positions, and it's not uncommon to submit proposals for more than 2 months.
But justify, the key thing is put it in there, but justify why you need it and make it compelling. And that number 2, there isn't, like Jen said, that just because you're soft money does not automatically guarantee that you will receive. And the way it works is you put it in the budget, you justify it, and if it's approved, meaning on the award budget that you received, then it's approved by NSF, and only then is that approved.
Absolutely.
Let's stick with this a little bit. We got a couple more questions on this. One, does the 2-month limit apply if there is a postdoc in a regular research proposal? Does it apply to the postdoc? And 2, does it apply only to institutions of higher education, or is there some breakdown as to where this rule does not apply?
From a policy perspective, it applies to proposers. It's not just institutions of higher education. That's point 1. And point 2, as Jen mentioned, if a postdoc is included as senior personnel, then the policy applies to them.
Okay, sticking with the budget, is it possible for an undergrad to get support as part of participant support costs if they are in a summer research program and employed, if they're working on the grant during the academic year?
Okay, so let's remember that participant support is for conference or training activities. Okay, so an individual would be typically is one or the other. They're really being in part B of the budget, which is other personnel, or participant support, but not typically both. The only exception to that rule is that we've kind of made the decision that if an individual is listed under on part B of the budget, but really that's not, rather, let me start from scratch. If the individual is funded by the institution as an employee, but they're receiving like their work for the institution is working in the library or working in the food service hall, then we don't consider that substantially what they're doing. And so they could receive the funding from that as well as being a participant. We wouldn't want to preclude those individuals of getting an opportunity to serve as a participant. But the bottom line is you're either an employee or not, and you have to consistently treat the individual that way.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about, or you discussed the facilities, equipment, and other resources section of the proposal. And I guess the question here is, how do you quantify how much effort a PI is providing if they're not listed on the budget itself? And how should that be done within the facilities section of the proposal?
Well, an individual would, typically for personnel, you use facilities, equipment, and other personnel to identify individuals who are not on the budget. The best and most popular example is PI say, I don't need any salary from this particular proposal. So based on the work I'm doing, I'm not requesting any salary. Well, you would put their time then on facilities, equipment, and other resources so we could assess, or the review process can assess whether you have all of what you need in terms of resources, including personnel for that project. So if you're not putting the PI on the budget, you would be putting them on facilities, equipment, and other resources. And then I'm going to open it up to my other colleagues who may have more to add to that.
I've got nothing more to add.
Nope. Perfect.
Okay, let's.
I hope I answered that question. I'm not entirely sure I understood, but if I didn't get it right, ask it again to policy@nsf.gov and I will try again.
Let's move on to biographical sketch. So the question is, in a biographical sketch, can you list publications that are not yet accepted for publication on a biographical sketch?
Well, I'm going to let my colleagues also join me, but I'm going to start with the policy position on that. So first of all, what is the biographical sketch used for? And it's to assess whether the individual or team has the necessary qualifications to carry out the research as proposed. So you're looking at the individual's background, their professional preparation, and really most importantly, their products, of which publications are a part of, as well as their synergistic activities. So the important part is what it has to be, the products you're listing, especially as a publication, has to be accessible by the reviewers and NSF program staff. And so if they can't access it, you're not making a very good case of what your qualifications are, or you may not be. And so that's what's critical about those products, is they are going a big way to show I'm qualified to carry out what I'm proposing to do on this particular project. And so if it is something that's not been accepted, we need to access it or be able to access it in order to assess whether or not you can carry out that project or that piece of that project that you're proposing to do.
Yeah, I agree with that. Use that bio sketch to your advantage. It's a, use that space for things that, as Jean said, are evaluatable. We all have papers that we haven't, that are in prep and for forever. And you need something that is tangible for reviewers. I agree.
And you really need to make that decision yourself. Your biographical sketch is your document to show what your qualifications are. And so we get a lot of questions at policy@nsf.gov is, which should I put in the synergistic activities, this item or this item? No, you're making your case. Make it your strongest one.
I'm going to disagree slightly with my colleagues here. Only it's absolutely true that you want to make your strongest case about your expertise and what your products are. That said, if you are, for example, moving in a different research direction, your history is in the publications that have been accepted. But in astronomy, it's not uncommon to have papers in press that are listed even in a refereed journal article. So it doesn't make the strongest case in the biographical sketch for you to put something in press, or certainly not in preparation. That's a little bit too weak. But you do want to make your strongest case, but you do have the opportunity to put something in that regard, saying a publication is impressive, especially if you're working in a new research area, because it does demonstrate your expertise or evolving expertise in a particular area.
Oh, I agree with you, Randy. There are going to be those cases, but in those cases, they put it on their website, and that's what they link to, so somebody could see what it is they're talking about, so that they could make that assessment of qualifications. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. There are going to be those cases of transition to a new field.
Let's ask a couple of questions about current and pending support. First of all, can you explain how NSF uses these two different types of documents? We have the collaborators and other affiliations information, and then we have current and pending support.
Well, current and pending support is used to assess whether or not for the individual, there is capacity to carry out. People confuse what you put on the budget versus what you put on current and pending support. There shouldn't be. What we're using current and pending support is do you have the capacity to carry that out? So you may not be requested in the example I used before, you may not be asking for any time on the budget, but you're clearly spending time on the project. So what you're putting on current and pending support is how much time it will take you to carry out your part or your component of the research activity. We also use it for overlap and duplication. For collaborators and other affiliations, NSF uses that information to help manage reviewer selection. We want to make sure for the categories and collaborators and other affiliations, you're not conflicted with someone who we would use that information to not include that information as a reviewer for that proposal. So then I'm going to open up to my other colleagues to maybe add more to that if they choose to.
Again, said perfectly by Jean.
Yeah, I would agree with that. The collaborators and other affiliations is vitally important to make sure that we can manage conflicts of interest, and that's Jean said that, so I just will reiterate it. Let's end with another question here, a different question here on supplemental support. So you've received an award from NSF. And you want to request a supplement for maybe an undergraduate research program in the summer. When can you submit that request, and how much can you request?
I'll let my colleagues answer that.
Sure. So again, talk to the program director who manages your award. For most supplements, we do not advise asking the minute that you have the money in your pocket and you still have 3 years to spend it. So whenever a supplement request comes in, the first thing I do is look at how much money do they have left on this award. So it should be unless it's a special case, most supplement requests will come towards the end of an award, unless it's for adding undergrads or something that you didn't budget for before, right? There are a couple, again, depends on the program. But we'll always look first, is there a way that we could rebudget, or is this a special case where you can have extra funds? There is no real limit technically, although if it is above 20% of your original award, we need to have it externally reviewed. And so that will sometimes dictate, and some people might have it, even if it's below 20%, they might still have it reviewed for various reasons. I don't know, Randy, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I will just add that NSF follows the federal government fiscal year schedule. So if you have a request for an REU, for example, a research for undergraduates, doing it well beforehand is probably a good idea, because there may still be money available for it. If you want a student to start working in June and you submit the proposal May 29th, it's not going to be able to be reviewed in time for that student to get timely support. And there may not be any funds left, because we have to spend out our funds by the early August at the latest. So keep in mind that money is more plentiful, not even at the very beginning of a fiscal year, because we don't necessarily have a budget, but sometime in the spring is a more ideal time to ask for student support for a summer. Okay, well, we are just about out of time, so I want to thank Jean, Jennifer, and Randy for a great session. Thanks for answering all those questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We'd greatly appreciate it if you could complete our survey so we can get your feedback. We're putting a link to that survey in the chat. And these results will really help us shape future conference sessions. If you want to view the recording of this session, you'll find it on the Policy Outreach website and on our YouTube channel. And we will be starting back up again in just about a half hour for the merit review session, which starts at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So please join us for that, and we hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.